Welcome to Unlikely Intersections, the podcast where intent, impact, and inquiry inspire our conversations. I'm Dr. Philip Brown with my good friend Dr. Terry Jackson, and you're at the intersection. Fascinating thing about intersections is that we all go through many intersections daily, and the way we handle those determines the trajectory of our days and of our lives. Got a pretty interesting topic today, Terry. We're going to talk about co-creating culture, something we see scrambled up pretty often.
It's scrambled up pretty often, not only in the corporate setting, but also in societal setting, right? And so we really have to dissect this for the listeners because oftentimes you'll have a dominant personality who wants to dictate culture, and then sometimes culture dictates itself. So there's a fine line of how you develop a culture, and we're going to go through that today.
The one thing I'd say we ought to start with is let's put in the assumption right up front is that no matter what, there's always a culture.
That's right.
There's a culture that's going on in every organization, every family, every team, every unit, let's say, has a culture. And the real question is, if we're not satisfied with it, or if we think there's a problem with it, what can we do?
Yeah, that is so absolutely correct. What can we do? Because it's the belief system of the culture of the organization, or the belief system of the family, through all of their experiences as a working environment or in a family, setting. And I know we don't talk about culture from a family setting for that often. However, it's important to pay attention to.
The thing about the culture piece is that it just can't be an edict. Like it cannot be dictated. It's a lot like I have a saying that I use about respect, which is that you can't demand respect. Respect is only commanded, and that's based on your behavior is either worthy or unworthy of respect. And so that's how you get it, is based on yourself. It's really that self-work that makes people say, this person is worthy of my respect, or this person, I don't really have respect for them because of whatever.
That's right.
Well, culture has a lot of common components with that as well. Right. And, we may find ourselves in situations where we sense problems with what's going on and we'd like to influence them to a different place. But it's rare to find yourself in a situation, even if you're in a high position of authority. And this is a mistake that I've seen made multiple times and have made it myself in certain situations is, you can't announce it. You can't just say this is what's going to be it. There's a process that has to be embraced and has to be worked on. And we've got some pretty good examples of how those processes work in the three books that we're highlighting here, our books, whether it's co-creation leadership, Do You Speak Patient, or transformational thinking. It's how you get into the process of affecting that culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And the importance of it all is it's all interconnected, right? And they're all of these parts are always moving at the same time. You just have to be aware of the parts, and you have to be aware of when you're working with the models, where exactly you are. Because the culture is the culture, but the culture is also, you're always constantly challenging the status quo of the culture because you're always trying to make it better, right? A better culture for people to want to work and to come and to thrive. A better culture for your family to grow, and for that open communication that needs to happen to keep the culture growing.
And it's one of those powerful things, from my book, Do You Speak Patient, the acronym there, TELL ME, has a lot to say about culture at its core, right? Yes. And so if you come at it in a culture building standpoint and you have a certain trust that says, I trust that everybody wants things to be in the interest of the greater good. Let's just say that in a generic sense, right? Then that empathy piece of beginning to understand where everybody comes from, because we all come from vastly, vastly different experiences. And that's what has created all of our mental models, none of which are the same.
That's right. That's right.
You know, then it becomes a matter of the first L of listening with deep curiosity. And to me, those three things, those are the foundational elements that have to be laid before you really start talking about how you begin to transform an organization or to co-create something that is of all the people.
Yeah. You know, what I love about this is we hear people say we want to create a culture of performance, right? High performance culture. That's what we want. But in order to have a high performance culture, guess what? You got to have high trust, high empathy. You have to be able to listen. You got to be able to eliminate, maintain the health, and that is, I'm going to say, mental health, and then limit the constraints. So it's not like, well, we're just creating this one culture of trust and that's it. No. It's all the elements that you want that have to be a part of that culture of performance, a culture of empathy, a culture of trust. All of these have to be. And so it's difficult sometimes when I hear people say, well, you know, we are a culture of strong trust, but you got to have all the other elements that's going to drive the growth of what that culture is in that organization.
We get into, you know, what I just heard you say is something that we talk about all the time. And when folks talk about they want to drive a certain level of performance, it's a real slippery slope. And what they usually mean is they want a certain outcome, a certain predetermined outcome.
Yes.
We know that's a tough way to go, right? Too many factors, right?
That's
If you
right.
you kind of have to also trust that if you're focused on the right processes and all the people are focused on the right processes in the right ways, that outcome is going to take care of itself. Frequently going to be much higher than what you aspired to in the first place.
That's right.
But if you make the focus on the outcome itself, you just miss too many things along the way. You know, we're each limited as individuals to the world we have known and lived.
Mm-hmm.
If we, as leaders, try to make our experience the focus of the whole team, we're going to miss a lot. And we're going to underperform every time because it just doesn't acknowledge how interdependent we are, and it doesn't allow that co-creation process to emerge.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the things you and I think we've talked about it on episodes before, you know, the Ted Lasso series.
Yes.
This season 3, you know, the episode that's released today as we're recording this, and it'll be long since out by the time this show comes out, but it really touches on these topics. It talks about, you know, there's a strong trust theme. This is episode 9 of season 3. There's a strong trust theme. And throughout the course of the series, they've been developing this process theme of how they play as a team, how they co-create this new way of playing that they go to. So, you know, it's a demonstration of how it can work, a very strong metaphorical piece that makes it happen. But the truth is, if we really look at any high-performing organization, you're going to see those components every time.
That's right. And they're interchangeable given where you are in the process and what's needed at that particular time. Because again, trust is needed at a particular time, empathy is needed, the ability to listen. And so I always like to think that a leader is one who can take off many hats, take off and put on many hats, right? And, you know, just understands the connectivity of all that is needed to have an extremely successful organization, which means you have a successful culture.
Yeah, connecting the dots is one of the hardest things, I think, and one of the mistakes I see most commonly in organizations that are struggling is folks have not connected the dots, and it begins to become too leader-centric. You know, and in the world we live in today, where knowledge is so expansive, you just can't do it by yourself. The most talented person in the world can't do it by themselves. And so leadership, you know, 400 level leadership or graduate level leadership is really about how you exert those components and have it come from the people. But, you know, that's not new.
No.
Lao Tzu,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
You know, is that, you know, if it, you know, great things happen, and if a leader's done his job well, the people think they did it themselves.
That's right. That's
You
right.
know?
That's right.
And so, you know, these are not new, these are ancient concepts that somehow we have forgotten. And we've done some really important things along the way, you know. So just taking, you know, healthcare as an example, one of the things is, you know, the whole lean process improvement, which kind of is a manufacturing type process, that has some value, and you can take it too far
Yes.
because it, you know, it's a model that works really well in manufacturing and has some good applications in other things, but it can't necessarily be the way. But it can be part of a culture.
That's right.
And so this process of co-creation is, okay, how do I incorporate this line of thinking? How do I get people who are really good at figuring out these components to work with these other people who are visionary and work with these other people who are, you know, all the different components.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's what it's all about, that co-creation process.
I would agree with you. It's like the conductor of an orchestra, right? He has 400 people that's performing under him, and he has the wand, and everybody knows exactly what they're supposed to do, what note they're supposed to play, and they play it. And so they co-create this masterpiece of music because everyone knows. And I know that in an organization, it's a little bit more difficult than that. But the key is you have to be aware of what is going on. And the most important thing that a leader can do today is ask the right question.
I've said that so many times in groups, is that, you know, one of the differences between being an expert and being an expert leader is usually for the expert, whether it's a physician or a scientist or anything, a lot of times it's the race to the right answer. But for a leader, it's a perpetual quest for the right questions.
Yes.
And that is such a different mindset, such a different model that you see as people ascend in an organization. A lot of times they just kind of peter out because they can't make that leap from the one who has the answers to the one who knows some answers, but really knows there's more and needs to ask the right questions.
That's right. And often it is, so what is the right question at this given time, given where we are? What is the right question, knowing we know where we want to go? We're kind of, you know, kind of stalled a little bit. So what is the right question that's going to propel us to that next level? And that takes deep thought. That takes co-creation, right? Because oftentimes it's not one or two people that's going to come up with the right question. It's probably going to be a conversation that happens, and then all of a sudden the light bulb goes off, and someone tosses out a hint, and all of a sudden the question comes, and so there's further dialogue that happens. But that's a continuous process.
Yeah, I've heard it called emergence.
Yes.
Right. Like gifted leaders are very talented when it comes to getting the right questions and actions to emerge from a group. They don't go in there with the answers. You know, they do the important pieces of listening, and listening in such a way that you can hear what's behind certain things, right? And now we're starting to get at where culture is, because culture, you know, I'm fascinated now because so many people have started talking about culture, our culture. And it's fascinating because a lot of times the people who end up being the most vocal and can describe that culture are the farthest off base, because the truth of it is, a lot of times, you know, culture is a way of being. And we know as humans, we're not real good at describing our being. It's more of a feeling. It's an existence. You know, even the most enlightened have an awareness of their being part of the time, right? So how can we, how can we really talk about it so brazenly? And those are the same organizations that you can go to a different part of the organization from where you heard that and say, man, this is nothing like what they just said.
You know, you just read my mind, because what I was sitting here thinking is subcultures. What are the subcultures? If I go to different parts of the organization, I'm going to get a different definition of what their actual culture actually is, right? Given what they do and how they see themselves and their role within the organization. So those subcultures, happen that lead up to this, this culture of the organization. But if you really want to understand the culture, you got to get deep within. You got to go to the very first floor, if you will, where those who are really doing the work can explain to you what it feels like to work within that organization.
That's right. The culture starts, and people get it backwards. They talk about, top down direction setting, but culture really starts at the ground level. It's how people behave. It is the unwritten, unspoken way that people are going to react to a given situation. And to me, it's always been fascinating that there seems to often be an ignorance of what that really is. It's almost, I would almost say it's an arrogance that exists, because it actually takes humility to go and do the work that is required to understand what the culture is. And that's why cultural transformation is such a long process, right? Like people think, well, we're going to come in and we're going to take a year or 2 years and we're going to turn this thing around. And, we know it's a minimum 5-year commitment to really begin to turn that thing, especially in a larger organization. And then beyond that, it's continuous.
It is continuous, and what makes it so challenging is the fact that at the time that you're turning this thing around and doing all this culture work, there are new players coming into and new actors coming into the culture. You got new employees who are coming in who've had experiences elsewhere. You have changes in the marketplace that's happening that's saying that, hey, you're headed in the right direction, or maybe you need to tweak this direction of who you want to become as an organization. So there's so many dynamics that are happening that when you make this shift toward whatever you say, it's a constant review of, are we headed in the right direction? What do we need to tweak? What do we need to add? How can we be? I like to use the example of an amoeba. The amoeba doesn't have a whole lot of structure, but it does have some structure. It's very flexible and agile as it moves, and so you have to kind of be like an amoeba as an organization, given all the dynamics that are happening in the marketplace.
Well, the external world is on a rapid pace of change that is only getting more rapid, that we'll continue to see for the rest of our relatively short lives, right? It's going to continue to be fast. And so being adaptable in that sense is a must if you're going to continue. So you see that so many different businesses, whether you talk about Fortune 500 or whatever, they aren't durable anymore. They can't meet the changing needs except for a finite period of time, and then they just wash out and go away.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'm gonna tell a little story. A couple weeks ago, I was having a conversation with my daughter, and this relates to culture and an organization. And I had the question. I said, "What is it about our communication lines that enables you to respond to me the way that you do sometimes?" And she was like, "What do you mean?" I said, I can say something to you and you have the knack of always asking the right question. I said, but sometimes you'll respond in a funny an intelligent, funny way that I'd never really thought about. And I said, so again, it's nothing, and I don't want you to, think this is not anything that's negative. First and foremost, I wanted to tell you that it's not anything that's negative. But I was just curious as to why do you respond to me the way that you do? And we got into how we communicate, and so it really boiled down to her ability to be comfortable with me and being able to understand the role. She understands clearly the father to daughter role, but then there's a friend to friend kind of role where she'll come back with a smart remark after I've asked her something, and I'm like, wow, I didn't think about that. But then when we relate that to culture, the openness of communication, which is important in every culture. So now I'm at the point where I'm expecting the unexpected from her, in an answer when it's, we're just having she and I having this tete-a-tete, we're going back and forth, as I call it, trash talking or whatever. I'm expecting that funny, intelligent response, but it's a beautiful piece because she's that comfortable with being able to communicate with me, understanding that role of friend to friend versus the father to friend relationship.
Yeah, that's magical. That's what it looks like when the TEL is in place in Tell Me, right?
Yes,
Trust,
yeah.
empathy, and
That's it.
and the same thing occurs in any team, in any organization. That when that cultural piece has a trust component, that it's a safe space to get ideas out, there's a trust that everybody is doing what they think is best at a given time toward the common purpose. When there's the empathy pieces that are really understanding that everybody's different, that everybody comes from a little bit different place, that their interpretation of what is in the unified direction may be a little different than yours or mine is, and then really being able to listen in such a way, curiously, not defensively.
That's right.
As soon as you put defense in there, and my favorite thing, right? I'm an offensive player. Yeah. But as soon as you put defensiveness,
That's right.
into anywhere in the TEL, you're going backwards.
That's right.
And all that defensiveness is, in my opinion, is where we as individuals have created models in our head that, basically that I'll be happy if these conditions are met.
That's right.
Right. And so those conditions may be polar opposite from the mutual purpose that's been agreed to. So if we as individuals can check ourselves in important ways, be aware of the fact that, hey, I'm putting conditions on this thing that really hadn't got anything to do with what we agreed was going to happen, and just be aware of that phenomenon, it gets a lot easier. And I've experienced that myself in teams, business teams, just like be sitting there and think, how can that person, like, I know they're intelligent, I know what they do for the organization, what they're thinking is so backwards, and then catch myself and say, well, not only are they acting based on what they think personally, there's also a role definition that they have for the organization that is requiring them to bring these things into the common discussion. And then healthy groups will take the collection of all those things and make something different out of it, something that incorporates all those components, but is a fundamentally different thing. And to me, that's the real magic of co-creation, when we can create something that is different from any one specific model, but is in itself a functional, viable way to move forward to the next step.
Yes, I heard a couple things. Suspend your judgment, right? As people say, when you walk in the door to this meeting, leave your ego at the door, and we're coming here for the greater good. And so when you do that, then you're able to create, as you said, or co-create solutions that are far better together than if they were individual solutions. And so it's about the synergy. It's about creating exponential or quantum, if you will, solutions, and they only come from people suspending judgment, laying elements on the table, taking those elements on the table, and creating a solution that's much better than any individual solution could be.
Absolutely, and that's where you get to the second L, right? The sort of the first thing you can do once you've got those conditions met and your group is starting to function. You're trying to co-create something that's really powerful. The first thing you can do together is limit constraints, right? So basically, what we do is take everybody's model that they threw into the pot and say, okay, these are the things that are parts of these various models that are keeping us from moving like we want to collectively. So how do we limit these things that are holding us back? You know, and it's a process of working together because everybody doesn't have totally common knowledge. There's overlapping knowledge. And so you don't want to throw out things necessarily that are really important for the overall viability, but then there are other things that can probably be discarded outright. And it's a spectrum. And so you work together to figure out what that is. Then you put it into play. You know, that's your first iteration of a co-created solution, is when a group has come together in an atmosphere of trust, empathy, and listening and started to limit the constraints that they sense based on each person's model. That's step one.
Yes, absolutely. And you just said a word that is extremely important in the entire process. That is iterative, right? It is it because it's, you know, you apply, you observe, you tweak, and you keep moving. And so that is an iterative process that we all have to be mindful, is that it's not static. And so just because we implement, well, yes, it succeeded or it failed. No. You know, it goes back to what Giannis said the other week in his interview when the guy asked him, was the season of failure? I think that was the question.
Yeah.
And he looked at him. And he took him through this series of logic by asking him questions. He says, well, if you don't get a promotion this year, was it a failure for you? And I'm asking you a question. The guy says, no. He says, well, it's not a failure. It's steps to success. And then he says, Michael Jordan played 15 years, and he won 6 championships. So does that mean the other 9 years were failures? No, they were steps to success. And so every year is a new iteration because it's a new team in team sports. And it's probably every month there's a new team in the organization with so many people either leaving the organization, being hired. So it's an iterative process. And as you bring in those actors or those players and employees within the system, you have to get them up to speed very quickly as to what the culture is. And so they're bringing with them their assumptions about what culture is and pieces of a former culture from the organization that they work with. And so you have to continue to iterate that whole process of what it is. And so you have to apply, you implement, you observe, you tweak, and you keep moving. And so that's what it really is. All of the moving parts, all of them connect.
That's right. And the next thing that happens is the M, right? And in my book, it's about health, so it's maintain health. But really what you're talking about is after you go into that action step, that execution step, maybe it's building your culture, maybe it's executing on something you're trying to do as an organization, which, you know, anytime you're building something through activity, it's a strong way to do it. It gets hardwired that way. But anyway, the next step of maintenance, and this is where if I had it do over again, I might think of a different way to say it because it's ripe for misinterpretation when you say maintain, because maintain does not mean that you're going to keep it the way it was when you got through the tail part of the acronym, right?
Yeah.
Maintain means that after you have gone into this execution phase, based on how you limited constraints together, you go into a repeat analysis, and you critically look at at how you have set it up. It's another thinking phase. And you say, okay, these components really took us in the direction we wanted to go culturally or productively or whatever you're working on. So we want to maintain these elements. We didn't get exactly what we wanted out of these, so we've got to iterate here, right? We have got to re-engage in that co-creation process. Sometimes you might find that when you did your original limiting exercise, you pulled out some things that were more important than you thought they were.
That's right.
That's okay. Put them back.
That's right.
You know, and you continue along that whole spectrum of things, and it becomes cyclical that way. You know, in process improvement, we call it PDSA, Plan, Do, Study, Act. But
right.
you know, all of nature is cyclical.
That's right.
So we might as well take that example from nature. I know that's one of your favorite things.
That's right. That's right.
And say, you know, how does this happen? You know, it iterates, it cycles.
That's right. That's right. And that's all it is a cycle. And it's a cycle of learning, right? We learned this didn't work as well. This worked better than we anticipated. So let's do a little bit more of what really worked well, and let's kind of pull back on what didn't work as well. And maybe we did take something out of the equation that should have been left in the equation, but given the information that we had at the time, we made the best decision given this.
Yeah, it's back to trust. You know, like it was our best effort, right? It just wasn't exactly like we thought.
That's right.
Or maybe something changed along the way in the external environment that made our original decision a little bit of a misfit, and we need to go back and change it backwards or
That's
change
right.
it in a different way.
That's right.
And then that takes you to the final E, to the eliminate barriers. And then what that really means is when you have that culture moving like you want to, or when you have that system moving like you want to, and you're very confident in that performance, sometimes you come upon something that is just in the way. And those times you just have to have elimination of that true barrier. A barrier is different than a constraint in my way of thinking. A constraint is just something that has a tendency to limit, to sort of prevent the proliferative process we've been talking about, to keep us from trying things. A barrier is something that is just a total obstacle that's in the way. And when you have that high functioning, then it's pretty easy for that collective to say, that's a barrier. We're going to eliminate that from the equation. And then you've got it. And once you start doing that, again, we just cycle back, just like nature.
That's
cycle
right.
back
That's
continuously and understand what's going on, what's changed, how do we need to react.
You know, it's interesting as you talk about cycles and we think about every aspect of our life, there's a cycle. We listen to some of the music and we hear some of the music coming back. We say, oh, that's coming back in this style. You look at some of the vinyl records that are being made now. Oh, vinyl records coming back in style. It's just a recycling of what was. We look at fashion and we say the same thing. Oh, that's coming back in style. I remember I wore that back in. But it's just cycles. And that's when I really begin to learn that everything in life really is about a cycle. It's not maybe linear, right? It's cyclic because it comes back at a higher level. It's like, for lack of a better example, what they talk about in the Christian doctrine, Jacob's ladder. Every step goes higher, higher, right? And that's exactly what it is. It comes back with this whole technological piece to it, but at its very root, it is what we knew it to be. You know, for instance, the cell phone, right? It's a means of communication, but now you got the convergence because you got the music, you can text, you can email, you can do all of this, but at its very root, it's communication, whether it's verbal, you know, even with when you've been able to look at people. Remember the Jetsons, they said we'd be able to see somebody, you know, as we talk to them on the phone. Now we can do that with FaceTime, right? And so at the root is communication, but it was a cycle of being able to come back at a much higher level of communication by converging all of those technologies into one device. So it wasn't linear, it was cyclic. And that's the importance of understanding what it means to be cycle, because now when something comes back, you're going to expect for it to come back at a higher level. But if you can get to the fundamentals of it all and realize, like the cellular phone, a smartphone, it's just at its very root is communication.
You could make the argument that communication is at the root of almost everything we do as humans. And it's amazing when you think about the power inside that smartphone now. More computing power than the computers that put people on the moon in the 60s. They're carried around in our pocket all the time. So we've figured out how to harness all that potential energy. Yet think about all the times that this device intended for communication causes us to miscommunicate.
Yes. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's like we haven't been able to evolve as fast as the technology. And a lot of it has to do with the baggage we bring, right? Same thing that goes in the culture building piece, right? Is that we all bring the baggage of our lives. It's what drives that mental chatter that's in our head all the time. We all have it. We know, you and I, we've talked about it on this show many times. Imagine our listeners are all having mental chatter right now, you know. But it's our experiences to a large extent that have driven that mental chatter piece and the emotional piece that underlies it. And if we're not aware of that, if we actually become that voice in our head instead of just realizing that that's a voice in our head, that's not necessarily the reality that's facing us.
That's right.
Then we're gonna mess up. We're gonna mess up the culture, and the thing you can do is, if you can create that space through awareness and just say, the way I feel about this is just according to me. This voice in my head is just according to me.
That's right.
And I need some additional inputs from the other people that are in my group that we've decided we're going to work on this particular purpose.
That's right.
If you can just create that little bit of space in your own head, and each can do the same, it's really amazing how then things become much clearer, and you drive levels of interaction that are just so much more powerful.
Right. This is my reality, not the reality, right? And I got to step out of my reality to communicate with others to understand what their reality is, so we can create a reality, not the reality. That's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, and it's, even this whole process of co-creation, of co-creating culture, that's just a reality too, because the culture that we create in our podcast, or the culture that we create in whatever organization we happen to be a part of, is different from other organizations. That's okay, right? It's just sort of it's become a covenant, right? Yes. Like a culture is like a deep covenant, in my opinion, that people take very seriously, that, there are components of how a certain course of action will go that really are inviolate.
Right.
That, you would no more, violate those things than you would go out and, hit your car with a hammer.
Right.
You're
right,
just like,
right,
you ain't going to do it,
right,
and that's really what mature cultures have, is this set of behaviors that are not dictated, but that are almost in the unwritten, unspoken. Sometimes folks write them, and it can get you so far, but it always has to be deeper.
Yeah, I would agree. You just mentioned the culture of this particular podcast, right? And, people probably wouldn't believe how we come up with this culture and how we come up with what we discuss, right?
Yeah, maybe we should keep it a secret.
Our secret sauce, right?
That's it.
But there's a covenant there, right? And that covenant is, when we begin to engage it, it's always great conversation. It's always great knowledge that is shared. But we can't release the secret sauce of what makes this this covenant and this particular culture what it actually is. But I would say this culture of this podcast is based upon your model, right? It's the trust, It's the empathy between us, how we listen well to each other, how what we limit as far as conversations. Even sometimes I might go astray. How we maintain the whole health of what this podcast is, and then what we choose to eliminate as we work through this process of having a successful podcast.
And at the end of the day, it's a co-created product. And it's not even just you and I; it's Jamie too, right? Is
That's
that
right.
we're all working together on this thing with a sort of set of general ideas that we'll call culture that make it happen.
That's right.
And if we can get enough people listening to us, we can achieve transformation.
That's right. Absolutely. It all fits together. It's a synergistic process that we hope serves the greater good, not only of organizations, but the greater good of society.
And we sit here and we think, one of the things I think that helps make this culture work is that, we both have been on common pursuits of personal mastery, of continuous learning, of, reading a lot about industry topics, about self-development, self-awareness, and all those kind of things come in. And what I hope conveys is there's a big space here that enables us to address difficult topics at times. Not as difficult a topics as what we have addressed, off air necessarily,
right,
but
right.
but nonetheless things that a lot of folks aren't very comfortable talking about, and certainly we'll continue to do more of that as the podcast evolves. But it's that healthy space that we
Yes.
both have begun to develop an awareness that, there are multiple realities.
Yes, there are multiple realities, and I understand yours and you understand mine, or if we don't, we lay it out there on the table in hopes that understanding is what we'll come to an understanding, and we'll engage in the dialogue around it, and we'll ask questions, and how can we make this thing better, right? Because with both of us, it's always about the greater good.
And that's where I think, we actually have a lot to offer to organizations.
Mm-hmm.
We can go and work with organizations and help, once they're ready, help them develop this ability to create space. Because without that space, their progress is going to be stymied. There's got to be space in order for the power of interdependence to work.
Right. And just the whole dynamics of this particular relationship, right? We got two hometown guys, Wilmington, North Carolina, who went to different high schools, and how we established this thing, and then the conversations that we've had, and the perspectives that we bring to the table, not only from a let me call it a majority perspective and a minority perspective, but most importantly from a human perspective. And how do you get to humanity as you work within your organization and you deal with your employees from a very human perspective, and how to bring the divide together.
And what's amazing, and why this I think is also a good example, is we were both more than a half century old before we knew each other.
Right.
Right?
That's right.
And
That's
so,
right. That's right.
We had a wealth, or half a century worth of experiences that were different.
Right.
Some that were similar, but really, everything about that whole environment, even though there were commonalities, was certainly different. But we end up in a cohesive culture, and we've done various different things along the way together, and that cohesion has been a constant.
Yes.
So I tell all that story to say that it is possible. Not only is it possible, it's not even that hard if you come at it with the right tools.
That's right.
To create something, from things that were remarkably different.
Yes, that's right.
To create a cohesive product that does something.
That's right. That's right. So you want to talk about the diversity and the equity and inclusion. It's in this equation, right? And all we've ever done in creating the culture that we've created between ourselves is listen, right? We listen to each other from a place of empathy from a place of trust, and we discuss whatever differences we might see, how we see the world, because we see the world differently. And you know what? I can see that. I can understand that. Never from a place of judgment, but from a place of learning and understanding.
Yep. And, that willingness to, the fact that we have established that environment is that not only are we willing to listen to one another, we have that expectation of one another.
Yes.
That, if your perspective is radically different than mine, I expect to hear it, and vice versa,
right.
Because
That's
we
right.
want to know.
That's right.
We're aware enough to know that there's definitely a lot more to it than the way I'm thinking about it. So
Right.
if you got something,
Right.
put it out there,
Right.
and it just goes from there.
Right. And so we have the great conversation here, and I can't tell you about some of the conversations we have off air because of what they might sound like, but they're all great conversations. Whether it's I might want to vent a little bit, and Doc might want to vent a little bit, but within that, it's always safe space. And so you also have to enable an environment or a culture where employees can vent a little bit. There's not the judgment of, how is this impacting my performance, right? Because I may be a little upset at someone I work with, and I need to be able to say something about that, especially to my leader or my manager, without being judged by it, so I can get back to the high-performing individual that I am, right? It's how you do it, not what you do, right? And so you have to have those, as a leader or manager, you have to have that ability to allow your employees to kind of get off their chest what needs to be said so they can continue to move on, because as human beings, we all need that.
Another strong theme in Ted Lasso, by the way.
That's right.
And including
That's right.
season 3, episode 9 had a strong theme of exactly that. And it's so powerful, right? Again, that safe space, there's nothing about the safe space that says, you can't be emotional.
That's
you
right.
can't, there's none of that. It is that the safe space means that there's trust enough that I can be vulnerable enough and show my emotions. And you won't necessarily take it as it's not personal at
That's
that
right.
point, in the sense of it's not against you, right? It is the world according to me. And I'm clearly trying to reconcile something from the external environment that is in conflict with that. And just the very act of being able to get it out, to articulate it, to say it in a safe space, and to feel like somebody has listened to it, doesn't even mean anything's got to change in what the unit is doing.
That's right.
Doesn't mean the culture changes necessarily.
That's right.
But the culture has incorporated what I've put out there and maybe that's a constraint that I've brought that we then work together to eliminate.
That's right.
Who knows? But that's how it really works. It's it's this openness, it's this space that really makes things better.
And that's extremely important and valuable. I remember my last stint in corporate, I used to sometimes have some tough conversations with some people, and I would say, well, hey, can I have permission to have a tough conversation with you now? And they give me permission, and we have the tough conversation. And after that, okay, time's up. And, we go right back to what the normal conversation may have been, right? It might have been a conversation about sports, but it's never personal. It's always about how I see you can become better. It's always about how you see that I can become better, right? Because we're trying to improve all at the same time. And you can help me co-create a better me, and hopefully I can help you co-create a better you. And then we, move forward together.
And that's where we really are. And that's one of the things that Terry and I would offer to our listeners, anybody that's listening that needs this kind of work done in their organization, or even for them individually. We're certainly here. Reach out to us. You can get us at unlikelyintersection.com. You can get us on YouTube, at Unlikely Intersections, Facebook Unlikely Intersections. You can find me at docphilipbrown.com or Doc Philip Brown on LinkedIn. And Terry?
You can find me at LinkedIn, Terry Jackson, PhD. You can find me if you Google me. You can find me, and you can go to YouTube. I challenge you to go to YouTube and listen to some of the pieces that Dr. Brown and I have recorded, not only for our Unlikely Intersections, but some of the different pieces that we've recorded around different topics that might be of interest to you.
We'll see you at the next intersection.